commenter asked, ironically, or maybe unironically, for the meaning of my last video on man's search for the ability to tolerate meaninglessness. And what I'm trying to say, or trying to express, is the difference between human beings and animals and the long-term viability associated with the way their brains work. Humans are subject to a type of suffering that animals are not, which I'll illustrate with a thought experiment. Let's imagine that we could experience reincarnation and carry our memories with us, and that we could run through this experiment both as a human being and an animal and compare the differences. As a human being being transported from one body to another at different times and places in human history, you would see how different one life is from another, apart from the unchanging aspects of humans that make history rhyme. Each age and place could be unique in terms of the meaning the inhabitants ascribe to things such as the consequence of human interaction and the source of natural phenomena. There would be different personalities, and for example, the technology would be different, as would be the style of dress, music, art, language, religious beliefs, and values. These can all vary greatly by time and place with human beings. It would be possible, due to the retaining of memories granted our traveler in this thought experiment, for them to have nostalgia for the past and thus suffer for it. It would also be possible for them to see the progression of human history, the timeline, the changes, and the possibility that these changes would lead to annihilation. They could suffer for the fate of the species, the prospective fate of it. What I'm getting at is that this thing that causes us to need meaning in a way that animals don't is the reason for man's invention of the doomsday clock, which is a real thing. There's an understanding that man's ideas could lead to our destruction. It's the thing that causes us to ascribe meaning to things that makes this possible. And that thing is the ignorance of body identification that, combined with this unique brain of ours, allows for the invention of this conceptual self rooted in the thought I. It makes for an inner narrative that does not exist in animals. That inner narrative cuts us off in a way that causes us to need novelty and meaning. Like if you take an animal and put them in a cage, they could eventually go crazy because it is thwarting their natural drive to perhaps wander. But a human would be driven crazy more rapidly in a more severe way with delusions and hallucinations. It makes for each person to have a unique character between their ears that exists not in the real world, but on some timeline where potentially good and bad things can happen. The running of attention up and down that conceptual timeline has several implications for what happens in the real physical world. Each person with their conceptual self is trying to bend the world to their will for the purposes of having immortality and limitless resources. While that's not possible, it's clearly the objective, as evidenced by human behavior in this day, where uniquely positioned individuals can aspire to these things through the accumulation of goods and development of technologies that strive towards immortality. There's no end to what a person will attempt to accumulate and do to preserve their life. That behavior, extrapolated to all humans, is what will end us. It's all predicated on the capability of the human body-mind combined with automatic identification with it and the use of the mental agent I to navigate the conceptual self to make the plans that shape human history. On the other side of our thought experiment, the transmigration of souls between individuals and one animal species through natural history, say lions, would yield no nostalgia, no sense that animals were guiding themselves along a timeline that could potentially lead them to causing their own destruction. The meaning that animals ascribe to events does not lead them to the path of uniqueness. They remain on a circle. They don't interact with the astral realm in the same way that our hardware has allowed us to do. There's no such imaginary character in their head rehashing old arguments in the shower. There's no sense that something is missing inside them. No sense of some inner void of unknown origin that can be filled by magic or technology. They don't have a need to ascribe meaning to things in the way we do. Therefore, they are not doomed in the way that the Bible describes humans as being doomed by virtue of having the ability to judge good and evil. In having that ability, we have judged the natural world, which was perfect in its function of maintaining consciousness. We've judged it to be inadequate, and therefore, in trying to improve it, we have put ourselves on a timeline that is not circular, but rather is linear and has an endpoint, and it contains novelty, and that's our destruction. And while it's not possible to jailbreak the entire species from this ignorance of body identification, which causes suffering, the need for security, the need for justice, and the need for meaning, it is possible to be liberated as an individual. And that's the purpose of spirituality, real spirituality, not nominal spirituality, which I describe in another video that I'll link in the description. A human has the opportunity to grow a soul, which is nourished by the absolute truth of this moment in the same way that a plant is nourished by the sun's light. It's the conceptual self, rooted in the thought I, that shades the soul from this light of absolute truth, which would grow it. It constricts the spiritual heart like a serpent. Only the death of identification with the body and I thought, and its surrender and sinking back to its source in the spiritual heart, will break the judgment and relational thinking that weaves the veil of thought that renders our soul anemic in the constriction of ego. Only when the root I is broken from as the agent of self does the constrictor lose its purchase on the soul, on the energy body. When there's no identification with I, phenomena can do as it will, but it will not cause a disturbance to the energy body for lack of a sense of being anything to which it relates. There's only a sense of being that which observes what was once taken to be a self, but is realized both experientially and conceptually to be dependently originated phenomena. And in this is the peace that surpasses all understanding. This is the growth of the energy body from the spiritual heart and its ascendance in both location and vibration.